Hello everyone, thank you for joining me again and welcome to any new viewers. This is To The Point English with Ben. I'm Ben, and in this video I'm going to give you some tips on how to paraphrase for your English exam. Now, as I mentioned in a recent short video, paraphrasing is extremely useful and important for the Cambridge English exams, so the B2 First, C1 Advanced and C2 Proficiency. But actually, it's pretty useful for most English exams. I know in IELTS, for example, you need to be able to paraphrase the question. But I have to say that it's also pretty useful for your English in general, not only if you're preparing for an exam. Having the ability to express ideas using different words, which is basically the definition of paraphrasing, can really help you demonstrate an advanced level of English. Now, before we look at my tips on how to paraphrase, I just want to show you this short text. Now, this text is taken from a C2 Proficiency Cambridge English exam essay task. So what I want you to do now is to pause the video, spend a few minutes reading the paragraph, and then you have two options. You can either summarize what you have just read in this text verbally, so just speak it, or maybe just in your head if you have nobody to speak to and you feel embarrassed speaking on your own. Or you can spend a little bit more time rewriting the paragraph, so expressing the same ideas but using your own words, so paraphrasing the paragraph. And then at the end of the video we're going to look at how I have paraphrased this paragraph, taking into consideration all the tips that I'm going to give you now. And the first tip I'm going to share with you today on how to paraphrase is make sure you're very familiar with the text that you need to paraphrase. Now, sometimes in exams you don't need to paraphrase a long text. It just may be a sentence, so that's not a big challenge to get to know and to get familiar with one sentence or even just an idea. But sometimes you need to rewrite or summarize or express in your own words paragraphs or even longer text. So it's really important that you understand very well the text that you need to paraphrase. So you need to identify the main ideas, the key points in the text. As I said, for the C2 Proficiency exam, for example, you have to identify two key points in each of the texts that you have to summarize in the essay. So make sure you spend some time, although your time may be limited in the exam, it's worth dedicating some time to really absorbing the information in the text. And tip number 2, come up with as many synonyms as you can for the key words in the text. So there will be some words which are obviously more important than others, like prepositions and articles and sometimes pronouns. You don't need to paraphrase or find synonyms for those types of words, but nouns and adjectives and the more important key words in the text, you need to be able to find synonyms for most of those. So again, depending on how much time you have to complete the task, jot down or make a list of as many synonyms for the key words in the text as you can come up with. So then when you start writing your text, you have this list of words, this list of synonyms that you know you can use in order to express the ideas that the original text has, but in your own words. Really, using synonyms is the most important aspect of paraphrasing. That's pretty obvious, right? But I will give you a word of warning regarding using synonyms. Don't overuse synonyms. Something I've noticed when I've been correcting essays for the C2 Proficiency, students sometimes really try to avoid repeating any of the words that they found in the original text. And sometimes it gets a bit confusing because if you're constantly trying to find synonyms, you can lose the original meaning. So that's the danger when you're looking for synonyms all the time. You may use a word which, yeah, technically it's a synonym, but it's not specific enough or it's not appropriate for the text. So sometimes you just need to use the same word that is used in the original text to maintain the same meaning. And tip number 3 is to use different grammatical structures to the original text. So it's possible that in the original text an idea is expressed in the active voice, for example. So you may be able to adapt your response text by just using the passive voice. So expressing the same idea but using a different grammatical structure to demonstrate that you're not just plagiarizing, you're not just copying the first text. So that combined with using synonyms can be quite effective in paraphrasing and rewriting the original idea, but in your own way. So expressing the same idea, but using your words and your grammatical structures. Of course, other grammatical structures you can use are cleft sentences, inversion, conditionals. I've made another video about how you can use these grammatical structures to improve your writings, so I'll link to that in the description. And the fourth tip, which is linked to the last tip with the grammatical structures, but it's to present the information in a different order from the original text. Okay, so maybe a different order in the paragraph. So maybe you put an idea which was presented in the first sentence in the original text, you put it in the third or fourth sentence in your text. That may be difficult because it may get a little bit confusing, so you have to be careful. But often you can just change the order in the sentence. You may have a long sentence with different ideas, and you can change the order of those ideas within the sentence. And that's why I said it's linked to the previous tip, because often you have to change the grammar. Again, if you're using the passive voice to present the information in a different order, it will be different to, of course, the active voice that was perhaps used in the original sentence. The same with cleft sentences and inversion. That's all about changing the word order, which again is an effective strategy for paraphrasing. But you have to be careful, because that technique on its own wouldn't work. If you just use the same vocabulary, the same grammar, but present it in a different order, that's not going to be enough. In fact, with all of these tips, using them on their own is probably not going to be enough. You need to use a combination of all of these techniques to be able to effectively paraphrase a text. And my last tip for paraphrasing, tip number 5, is to paraphrase ideas, not just words and sentences. Sometimes it will be very difficult to use synonyms, you change grammar, change the word order. Sometimes it's just about expressing the idea in a different way. So yeah, it may be using different words and grammar and everything I've said before, but as you'll see from my example, it's not just about directly paraphrasing particular sentences or vocabulary. That's why it's so important to get a good understanding of the main idea and the key points in the text, so that you can make it as clear as possible when you're just paraphrasing a general idea. Okay, so let's go back to that text that I shared at the beginning of this video, and I'm going to show you how I've paraphrased it using some of the techniques I've just explained. Okay, so if you like, again, pause the video and spend a couple of minutes reading and comparing the two paragraphs, but I'm going to explain now what I've done and why. So in the original text, the first sentence is, "Nowadays, in some cultures, there may often be confusion between generations about what is acceptable behavior in certain situations." And I've rewritten that sentence in this way. "It is often the case that in some parts of the world today there can be intergenerational misunderstandings about what might be considered appropriate behavior in particular circumstances." Okay, so you can see I've used a lot of synonyms here. So in some parts of the world today is representing the same idea as in some cultures. Perhaps you could argue that it's not exactly using synonyms, but it's definitely expressing the same idea. And then there can be intergenerational misunderstandings. So that's paraphrasing confusion between generations. Intergenerational is basically means between generations. And misunderstandings, again, literally, you would not necessarily say it's a direct synonym of confusion, but in this context, I think it expresses the same idea. And then about what might be considered appropriate behavior in particular circumstances. And in the first sentence, that was written as about what is acceptable behavior in certain situations. So I think behavior was a very important word here. There are synonyms for behavior, but they don't exactly express the idea. And I think sometimes you need to use the same words, as I said before. And then in the next two sentences, I've paraphrased using just one sentence. So this is how you can change the grammatical structure in your own text, but still maintaining the same idea. So in the original text, it was, older people sometimes complain, for example, about the real or imagined rudeness of others, such as in the use of electronic devices in public places. However, the younger generation do not regard electronic communication as intrusive, but rather as fundamental to their way of life. Okay, and I've paraphrased those two sentences in one sentence, as I said, so I've linked the ideas. And as you can see, I've written it in this way. A perceived impoliteness, so perceived impoliteness is paraphrasing the real or imagined rudeness. So impoliteness is a synonym of rudeness, of course, and real or imagined can be perceived. When using mobile phones in public, now I've specified mobile phones, not just electronic devices, because that's really what they're referring to, isn't it? Probably not laptops or tablets, maybe tablets, but really they're talking about mobile phones, so I think it's perfectly okay to specify there. For instance, instead of for example, can be cause for complaint in the eyes of older people. So older people sometimes complain. That's how it was written in the first text. Now here you can see I've used older people. I haven't used synonyms. Again, I was thinking about using elderly people or just elderly, but that's not the same idea. I think I could consider myself an older person. I'm older than young people, of course, but I'm not elderly. And the last part there of that sentence, which I have paraphrased, whereas this way of using such technology is seen as an essential aspect of life by younger generations. And that's paraphrasing the whole third sentence of the original paragraph, where they said, however, the younger generation do not regard electronic communication as intrusive, but rather as fundamental to their way of life. Okay, so again, basically expressing the same idea, using some synonyms, some different grammar, but the idea is expressed. And that's very important. You need to make sure that the original idea and the original text is expressed in your text. That's the idea of paraphrasing. Okay, looking at those last two sentences in the original text, which I've again paraphrased just using one sentence. So in the original text, only increased mutual understanding is likely to resolve potential conflict or confusion in any society. In this case, as in all others, it pays to be aware of other people's point of view. And I wrote, in order to overcome these differences, it is necessary to take the views of others into consideration and try to empathize with perspectives that may differ from your own. So in this case, I've really paraphrased the idea. Yes, I've used some synonyms, but really I've taken the whole idea of those last two sentences and expressed them in my own words. So the idea of taking the views of others into consideration and trying to empathize with the perspectives that may differ from your own, that is really expressing the same idea as the original text in those last two sentences. Now remember, this is just a general example of how to paraphrase. I'm not suggesting that you should do the exam task exactly in that way, because in the C2 Proficiency it's about summarizing, not reparaphrasing every sentence as I have done here. And also you'll have a word limit and a time limit, so you have to take that into consideration. But this is just a demonstration of how you can use synonyms and different grammar, different word order to be able to express ideas in a different way. So you're paraphrasing and not just copying. Okay, I hope you found this video useful. Let me know in the comments if you have any other tips, and I'll see you very soon for another video. Bye.